There we go. Alrighty. Alrighty, so there's that started. I don't know if anybody showed up. We'll see. Where's my damn glasses? Here they are. I'll get up to speed to the best of my ability. Let us see. Yeah, I don't think there's anything significant to be observed there. I don't know whether that window just flashed on the screen. Not really a concern. And we're going to be doing a coding stream once I get rolling, because this is not a day for me to be springing out and into action as quickly as all that. So let me make my coffee first. I'm surprised it got a like. I didn't do anything for anybody to like yet. Onwards. So it's going to be about 4 minutes. Here is my timer. Takes a few of those to go through. And yeah, I'm in a bit of a new configuration today. And I'm not wearing the mic just yet because once I'm sorted out, I'll clip this on. Got a variety of things to talk about and a plugin to code. And we'll see how things work. Oh, hello, whoever it is that showed up. My coffee timer is telling me it's time to go and do another batch. So yeah, I could be doing that on, here we are. I could be leaving that in the kitchen or not streaming until I started, but I had to set up all the start stuff anywho, so it's like, yeah. Oh, and the thing I'm missing, the thing I'm not seeing is I keep covering up the window. Does that actually, and I have 2 mice in my way now. Does it still show? Yes, it does. Okay. So pretty much we shall see. This is my coffee timer. It is continuing to go. Boop. Yeah, when I get rolling, I'll tell you why I'm a little down today, because I'm a little down today, but it's just something that has to do with the plugin that I posted and the audience response of it. So I'm kind of in a state where, like, if you're watching this on playback, you can't see that people are sort of just disappearing off the stream, and I'm in the mood of like, yeah, okay, that sounds about right. It's just going to be one of those days, and we shall see. But first things first, I am going to finish making my next cup of coffee, and then we're going to figure out something useful to do, and then we're going to do YBandpass anyway. I've got some ideas to talk about, and I've got some stuff to talk about that's been more on my mind. And Oh, hey, it's time to pour another small amount of water into the coffee and come back in a moment. Oh, this crap's rattling. That's no good. Alrighty. We shall begin. This coffee is going to be a little bit too hot for a little while, but that's fine. It's bad for you anyway. So yeah, I am Chris from Airwindows, and this is one of my weekly coding streams. And we have a specific idea for what we're going to do today, which is YBandpass. And since that's a fairly straightforward process, like even if I have a slow time getting to grips with it, we're probably still going to be able to finish it. So that gives me time to talk about other ideas and just kind of connect, I guess. I'll take a moment and post something else in the chat. If you can't see, I have a bit of a new setup here. Oh, and I think it does need to be visible to work, so I'll try to make that happen. So yeah, this is a bit of a weird, it's going to be a busy week for me because I got a lot of stuff going on, including 2 mixing sessions on the album that I'm working on. It's for a band called Wojciki, and it's been going pretty well. We've done about 5 tracks so far. I am mixing songs for this guy at $40 an hour. And it's probably how it would be if I was to do that for just anybody in general, except for if that became like something that a lot of people wanted, I might be less available for it rather than wanting to jack it up, I guess. And the funny thing is how I can work with somebody like that and get a strong effect out of this guy's music, while at the same time I do recent video posts, like for Clip Only 2, and I'm basically getting a lot of flack. So that's the mood of today. The mood of today is putting in weeks and months of work on like undersampling schemes and ways of making my weird sampling rate dependent things work correctly at elevated sample rates, and having somebody popping up and being like, it totally doesn't work, it doesn't sound right, this is not okay, none of your stuff works at different sample rates, after months of attending to exactly that, and then posting a video and having the first comment be, can we all take a moment and think about how disturbing this music is? And I reacted with the self-deprecating, like, why indeed we can. And people asked for this because I was doing bespoke and they wanted to go back to Logic. And well, and on reflection, I do have to think about the automatic nature of that self-deprecating answer, like, oh goodness, ho ho, yes, we can all think about how terrible my music is. Why do I do it at all? Why am I doing any of this? And like, it's all very well to be a little irony poisoned and joke along those lines, but it cuts a little bit too close to home. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do about all that, but that didn't feel good. I like that people like the plugins and things. I don't have time to be a proper musician as I would understand it. In a lot of ways, I'd like to be, but there is a lot of fear around trying to do anything, because everything I've ever done gets these kinds of reactions. It's like if you're going to be a Cecil Taylor or a Captain Beefheart or something like that, and then you internalize the normal people responses, and the funny thing is, I'm reading a book on Beefheart at the moment, and he felt like I did about that stuff. The guy was very insecure and wouldn't do the work of making himself be a better musician, and just winged it on attitude alone and depended upon his band for a lot, and produced a unique result. And more relevantly, he produced a unique result that I personally got a lot out of when I was growing up. So it brings me onto that area of, if you are largely a weird or unacceptable person and you create art as yourself, you're going to create art that normal, well-healthy people who are kind of insufferable at times, like Karens, will not like your art. And they're correct not to like your art because you're not making it for them or doing anything that they'd be able to cope with. And they're going to speak more for the mainstream than you do, honestly. And then there will be people who like it. They're probably going to be weird people like you. And this is just the nature of making stuff. So we'll switch over momentarily to the making of stuff, because I have YBandpass ready. You can see on the studio cam that the laptop that I work on is now down here rather than over here. So when I kick on my little cam there and I'm doing my typing, I'm going to be looking a little closer at the camera rather than being very much over to the side. And that doesn't really matter. It's just, everything changes and adapts, and myself included. And we'll do the best we can with what we've got. Isn't that always the way? So, and I'm not sure whether you can, no, you can't really see on that camera. I do have a keyboard over here where my other hand is for the purpose of being able to do the bespoke thing and music making thing better. Because, you know, there's a part of me that comes back to thinking that if I'm going to make plugins for people to be able to make music with, I should be trying to do that. And I don't know the answer to that one. Because it seems like when I make music, people actively don't want me to do it. But that's where I have to get the ideas for making stuff. So, I don't know. It's going to be a thing. We'll see. I guess for better or for worse, almost nobody is here paying attention in terms of big numbers. So it's probably just as well. If I sort my head out enough to where I'm starting to make things that people are like, oh, yay, now I'm enjoying this. Where were you? Why weren't you doing that all along? Then maybe that'll be a change that works. But I don't know. The bottom line for doing things is that you've got to be true to who you are before you can get to be anywhere else. And that is important. That is something that matters. And I am as subject to that as anybody else. So it's 11:30. Oh, hey, Aaron. Not well, but we're going to make a plugin anyway. And I made a nice cup of coffee in the first 15 minutes of the stream. That, at least, is pretty delicious. And we're going to boop over to the coding view and kind of go from there. And I think one thing I might do is zoop over these screens a bit. Oh, that's not actually going to help at all, is it? I'm doing my usual thing of trying to cover the video feed of myself. That ought to do. So, last week we did drum samples, which was interesting because I wouldn't think that that would be that daunting or challenging, and yet a number of people had the reaction that I was going really fast and they couldn't follow the decisions that I was making. And that's just, I guess that's just kind of a thing. Like, one thing about being who you are and doing what you need to do on the basis of that is that you can accelerate and get pretty good at pursuing what it is you're trying to do. And interestingly, the making of these drum samples, like all these kick drum samples from the modular stuff, that actually went over quite well. Like, unlike the music that I make, the drum sounds I choose to make seemed to go over well with people. So it's like, I don't know. It's a thing. And so is this. So we're going to dive into this a little bit and see what we can get out of it. And we'll get ready to make a plugin. Let's see what we've got so far, because this is one of the things I've set up. YBAP is the identifying code for YBandpass, so that is correct. And I believe this is set up to actually work. Yeah. Colin, that's a good thing. Also, this will be a really good, this will be the first of probably many much better Q&A/coding streams. Because the deal is, the way that I've got this laptop set up now, because the musical keyboard is sitting over here, the chat is now much more in my line of sight. So I believe I'll be able to follow chat way better. We'll put it to live chat so that anybody who says anything, no matter how heinous, will be able to say so freely. and we'll switch it back off again if we have to. But I do like seeing people chatting. Like, I'll like seeing people chatting slightly less if you're just slagging on my music and being like, well, why do you suck so badly? Because I'm getting that these days, and I'm getting that this morning, and I gotta say I didn't like it. And one of the things I can do about that is think of other stuff to do, although honestly some of that, the tracking logic I was using was based on chord progressions that I got off of my chord slide rule and stuff. That ain't going anywhere. I'm going to continue doing that. So it's very possible that further stuff that I do, like if I start singing like words, which normally make stuff more accessible to people, it'll probably be words that are based off of those chord sheets and things. And I've been working on how to do that in Bespoke. I've been working on ways of getting that happening in a way that I can use. And I have a pretty good feeling about that being something that can happen. Like, I think, like, I've got it sorted out that I can record vocals in Bespoke. I can grab that Beyer ribbon mic and sing stuff and capture it. I'm learning with these notes that I've made about Sample Player and Sample Canvas how to do that. And I also know that I can record stuff with console channel baked in to the recording path. I'm working on getting them to record in 24-bit. Bespoke currently records in 16-bit, and that's a downer. I don't like it as much, although I can dither to it. But I can also record stuff using console channel or console cascade if I want more distortion. And do the sampling through that. At some point I'll be demonstrating this. I'll do live streams and we'll be actually doing this stuff. But I'll be tracking vocals through console channel into the sampler, at which point I can edit it, but it's not changing the gain, so it's not breaking console in any way. And then drag clips out of the sampler into what they've got called Sample Canvas. And what that does is it is a kind of convenient way of arranging stuff. So it'll put stuff in a multi-measure loop. You can quantize it and fiddle around with the timing of it. And it's got like 4 tracks built into it just by starting off. I'm not sure if that's the only way you can do it, but that means I could sing passes of something that was meant to be a harmony, assuming I can sing harmonies, but that's another story, and drag it into this sample canvas, stack them up vertically, and have them recorded with console channel, meaning that sample canvas will exist inside console, and it will play all of the tracks through to where they feed into the console bus or into a chamber or galactic feed. I've got all this stuff set up to basically be usable, and that means I can arrange stuff in sample canvas where the sample canvas mixing is running inside console automatically. And that's an interesting development. That's something extra. And really for me to worry about another day. But the idea of doing that stuff, the idea of like taking these guitars and vocals and the ability to do these things, and then rather than treating it as like 1970s jam band, which tends to be what I do when I don't think this stuff out in a situation. Like if I'm in Logic, I'm going to run full-length tracks and just like solo over the entire area and play bass over the entire area and basically treat it like I'm going to edit something out of the result, which will never happen. In Bespoke, you don't have the capacity to do that. Instead, what you're doing is you're sampling particular things and then doing it in much more the modern way of doing stuff. Like you've got a voice, or you've got a guitar riff or a guitar chord or something, and you're dropping it in as a sample and repeating it or constructing something around it. There's a lot of ways of doing arrangements in that way. I definitely have an intuitive feeling that there's going to be something to be had out of that, and I love the fact that it's all completely free and open source. In fact, that's why I know that the guy in Bespoke is going to be working on 24-bit, etc. sampling, and things like the radio button sequencer that he's got. You can do really long sequences of things through using that and then telling it like, okay, each button is one beat. Instead of 16 notes, it's a whole note. And then please do 128 of them. And that gives you a fairly long like a bunch of measures to work with. But it's been only like 4, 8, 12, 16, 32, 64, and 128. And he has decided, and this will be happening in an upcoming version of Bespoke, to let you pick any number. So you can pick multiple numbers, and you can also pick, you can have multiple ones of these things going, and they could be different numbers. You could be picking radio sequencers that each had a different prime number, so they would all cycle through, and they will overlap, and they'll always be overlapping at a different place. And why would you care about that? Because you can take the other instruments, or samplers, or synthesizers, or plugins, any of these things, and switch them on and off using the radio sequencer. Now, the thing about that also is the radio sequencer is not a, you can't make it be non-exclusive. Instead, you're always selecting one of the outputs, so it's going to turn one thing on, and then all the other things will be off. And that's appropriate for things like multiple sample canvases where you've got like vocal introductions or whatever coming in just now and then. You'll be always selecting between and among those, but less useful for having a bunch of instruments and maybe having them all on it sometimes. But you can also do that with multiple radio sequencers, and they are very efficient compared to like a plugin. So you can have lots of these things in the interface. But more coffee. I'm getting distracted. This is what they call a stun lock. It's a political guy that I watch, Vouch, is frequently talking about getting stun locked into other topics of conversation. So yeah, to not be stun locked, let's open a recent project. None of these are what I had in mind, so let's open one that is one that I had in mind. And yeah, thank you for the well wishes on the music thing. It does hurt me when people just trash the stuff that I do, because I can only do like what I do. I don't really have a lot of flexibility as far as doing it nicely and properly for a regular audience, because all that will happen is I'll still fail at doing that, and then I'll lose interest and not do anything. So it's weird. I feel like to some extent my experience in these things is worthy of notice, and it's worth talking about it simply on the basis of I bet there's a lot of other people in the same boat. And we all got to ask ourselves, like, why are we doing what we do, particularly in the in the context of we're doing this thing which is like music and creativity. You ain't gonna get paid and nobody's gonna love you, so you'd better like what you're doing. Because I always say that if you are making music or anything creative, you'd better do the stuff that you want, because if you identify something that is a more popular demographic and you ignore the stuff that you want in order to try to do stuff that you think is going to sell, you're going to get your ass kicked by somebody who loves that thing as it is. Like, it's not going to work. You can't put on a false face in order to become popular. To some extent, you can probably spend a bunch of money and do that and get somewhere. But if the idea is like, oh, I'm going to be successful and maybe make money doing this and live and exist in this way, then that's not going to be a long-term solution. So you need to find the things where you're able to run with whatever your heart desires, rather than trying to identify, even if you're doing things like, oh, let's use Google or Facebook demographics or something, and be told what people want. Still not necessarily a great idea. If you're doing something that's because you care about it, you're going to have more authenticity about it, but you're also going to be more successful at doing it, authenticity or not. To get back to this, I need to take this and put it in this. Here's the one that I've done. And we're going to take a bunch of these things out of here and just copy them over and run with them, because this is a variant on the Y filters, and I've got them fairly well worked out, which is why this is partly a Q&A session, because it's going to be possible for me to answer questions while doing this. This isn't going to be that demanding as far as me thinking of new stuff. Now, I do have things that are going to be demanding that I'm not working on right now. In particular, I have an idea for a kick drum algorithm based on physical modeling of stuff like in a game engine. And I'm interested in seeing what that's going to be, but it's going to take some experimentation before I can even begin doing the audio plugin version of it. And I'll need to do the plugin version of it before I can get it into a usable form. And honestly, the first I see of the usable form might actually be in the surge synthesizer, because they'd probably be able to bring it on board if I can make it workable. And, that said, I might very well be able to build a bespoke object that is this plugin I'm thinking about, this kick drum idea that I'm thinking about, because I feel like I should be able to do that physical modeling thing. The idea there is kick drums like being sine waves. They don't always have to be. Some of my kick drums are based on triangle waves and things, like out of the Blue Lantern stuff. But often you make kick drums out of sine waves, and people tend to do these very naive approaches of, it's a sine wave, it's decaying, like falling off in volume, and it's also drooping in pitch in a particular way. And that's not necessarily what you want. There's a lot of interesting behaviors around how you hear the attack of the kick drum, where it fills in like mid-bass punch, where it fills in the lows. Is it just slow and not responsive? Is it punchy and aggressive? And I've made a bunch of kick drums. They're in the most recent sample pack that I distributed to people. There's a post on Airwindows.com about that, and I also posted it to the bespoke Discord, and they made a whole channel specially just for resources and contributions that people should know about, and like my sample library is the only thing in there so far. I'm sure people will come up with more stuff to put in. But that's another area where I'll probably be able to include the algorithm that I come up with once I've come up with. And the fact that kicks are based on sine waves, well, imagine like a tube or a tether ball, or like one of those cat toys where you have the circular thing and then there's this ball rolling around inside it. That is something where you can get a sine wave out of it if you have the physics engine. Oh, Jayton Chowdhury I have not worked with, but is, I believe, in both of these discords that I'm talking about. And I have seen the plugin. I'm thinking of something different, I believe. I'm not really sure how different my idea will be, but I think I'm talking about something. I would have to listen to Chowkick a little bit to have a clearer idea of where that stands. But yeah, my kick drum design ideas are more centered around like what the Rabid Elephant folks are doing with Portal Drum. Because I'm getting a Portal Drum when they start shipping them anyhow. And it's going to influence my ideas on how to make a plugin, a free downloadable kick simulator that sort of does likewise. And I don't see people normally designing kicks in the modular world or in the programming world with what I need as far as the pitch trajectories and amplitudes and things. Like, there's variations I need to include that are normally not attended to. And especially since I seem to be able to make some of these drum samples and things in such a way that people in general like them a lot, I'm eager to do a synthesizer style plugin that will produce that effect. So yeah, it might be a little costly though, because it would run a lot of sine or primitive, like low resolution sine calculations. So we need to do bandpass. We've just pasted this stuff into bandpass. These are our controls for the Y filters. Now we need to replace these with our controls for our values for the Y filters. And we're going to use this because this is what we'd settled on between the FPD and private. We're doing it based on enums. We've got multiple biquads. Here's one. This is the one that is the actual filter. And this is the fixed ultrasonic filters that handle and alter the amount of grit and distortion that this thing can produce. So having saved this, we can move on to the CPP files. And I believe this is already the multiply form, but we'll go with this. I'll figure out what I'm doing momentarily. We're going to be editing some of these things out because we don't have this many parameters. Yeah, Ferric Babutsi, I think you're talking about a tape simulation. What I'm talking about as far as making a better synthesized kick drum, there's a lot of reasons I want to do that. One of them is that I made good synthesized kick drums with Moog DFAM. And my recording path was bringing in a certain amount of noise and I had to filter it. And that does contribute to the sound of the thing. Like, some of my samples there have that certain organicness of like, okay, there's a little 60 cycle buzz and overtones just peeking through and making the tone of the kick a little more complicated. It's just an additional bit of noise and stuff going on. But honestly, I'd like to avoid that. And I've been synthesizing kicks in the synthesizer plugin Dexid. And I'm toying with the idea of doing likewise in the plugin Sfizz, S-F-I-Z-Z. Because there's a guy also hanging out in the same places that Jayton Chowdhury is, that If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure somebody will eventually tell me. There's a guy who's been working on SFZ format, which is a sampling format, and trying to popularize Fizz. And I had a look in it, and I was like, oh, I can do synthesis things in this. That's kind of cool. And I will see what can be made out of that. It's probably more synthesizing things. I've been also looking into a lot of the Surge stuff. Like this is a set of notes for the Surge library, and these are just Surge's oscillators. And this is just the variations in one of Surge's oscillators, which is the twist oscillator that is basically mutable instruments plates. And one of the reasons I started thinking about making a kick synthesizer is because this twist oscillator contains a couple of, it contains analog kick, analog hi-hat, and modal resonator and inharmonic string, and they need to be set up in a particular way where they're triggered and used as a kick simulator. And I tried them, and it wasn't my style. I was looking for something that was more my style. And this is the variations on filtering in Surge. And the interesting thing about that is that they've got their usual thing of like, this is the legacy ladder, which we had back in the day. This is the vintage ladder, which is obviously much better because it's more CPU expensive and it does more things. Just lots of stuff. But instead, what I found was all of these had different tones. Like their basic filter, there was a variation on it that was dull, one was clear, and one was kind of warm. Legacy ladder was on the pure side tonally, and that has its own uses. Their vintage ladder, some of the variations they had just didn't really make it for me, or sounded fugitive, sounded like you didn't really hear the resonance and stuff very clearly. And then one of their variations was more on the sweet side. There's a K35, there's an OBXD from somebody else, and very interesting things in cutoff warp and resonance warp. And my idea is I'll be eventually able to make patches in Surge that I can let people have. They may or may not want to include them. I'll guess wait and see, because having too many presets in a synthesizer is definitely bad, especially when a lot of them are just people throwing stuff into the hopper. But I was thinking about doing presets for Surge rather than on the basis of pads, leads, sound effects, that kind of stuff. Doing it based on the type of synthesis. So I'd have like a classic modern wavetable window, sine, FM2, FM3, string, and those would be among the things that I'd be making sounds out of, but it would be based on the style of synthesis being used, and then going from there. Because I find that a little bit more interesting to me. Like in Bespoke, what I've been doing is setting it up so that when I go for a sound, it'll be like Kern Crunchy Lead or whatever. Kern is a full bucket software synthesizer of particular characteristics. It has its own little voice. It's not a complicated synth, but it has its own little sound. And you can do things like run one of my plugins after it to do the filtering or so on. Stuff like that. But I'm finding it more useful to go for the style or the instrument, like picking up, what kind of solo are you doing? Okay, Les Paul heavily distorted or whatever, or Strat clean compressed kind of thing. You're reaching for the specific instrument rather than going like, pad effects or lead or whatever. And that is a way of, Sviz has a bunch of things in there. Sviz has a bunch of things in there. And yeah, Colin, as somebody just said in chat, if you would like to talk about how you go about making bad sounding mics sound better, then that's a great idea, because I'm just derping around with this coding thing. I'm trying to keep up a line in chatter so that at least something is going on. Because of that getting slagged about my music thing this morning, I'm in a bit of a down state, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to do the plugin, but you know, it's not going to be one of my most inspired and excited days, and that's fine, because sometimes you just got to have a more of a downer day, and it's what you do with it, and it's who you are while you're doing it that matters. That being something I do honestly believe. So it doesn't actually upset me when I have a crappy day where people are just giving me a hard time, because I'll just, you know, ride it out and continue doing stuff. This being one of those things. So let's take everything from overall scale on down and get ready to paste all of this in. But after this instead, because I'm keeping that there, because I want to remind myself I believe YBand, well, let's check. I do have my audio going, so yeah, Fotis, the thing about that is there's nothing wrong with me letting the haters bring me down. I don't want to be so incapable of taking new information in that I'm not listening. And if you're listening, that means that you're susceptible to hearing from somebody who just wants other stuff than who you are or what you do. That's not inherently wrong. It's not wrong to be brought down by stuff. It's not wrong to not please everybody in the world. I feel like the superpower there is being able to be brought down and then still functioning. And you know, there are ways in which I do and there are ways in which I don't. I'm always able to do another plugin or whatever. As far as creating new music, man, I'm so discouraged as far as that stuff is. I feel like I don't even want to ever make any more music again, because nothing that I do ever seems to, you know, but I do that stuff as myself, and that's what caused all of this at the very beginning, because there were things I wanted to hear, and the plugins are just a way of getting to that. They're not like, oh, I'd like to get paid by doing this. It's because I wanted to make certain noises, but in the computer. And the more of that I can do, the more effective it can be. And let's see if I can find a copy of YBandpass in here anywhere. So this is what I would have had previously. I don't know whether it's actually going to work or do anything. Might not. Yeah, so I might have a bit of a... Yeah, this is like a bit of a dummy version, because there's no bandpass here. This is what we had before I pasted any code in. So that doesn't really count. That was just building it to get something to happen. And it contained this code here that you can't see anymore because it's commented out. And then what it had under here was this, which is currently not doing anything. So basically what I had in the initial version of this was this here, and it's not in working condition. So we actively need to get our variant going. You know, sometimes it frustrates me that I have no ability to articulate what I'm saying in words, but oh well, I'm still here. I'm still making a plugin every week, which is more than some people can say, so it's like you take your good with your bad, I guess. Hey, Jess. So let's see, what have we got here? I know a number of things I need to do. This is among them. And I see that I have, oh, hello. Okay, this was what I did before. Low pass includes the stuff that I was doing with denormalization. That's in recent weeks, where I've adjusted the denormalization so that it works a little better for people and myself. And I need to include this in the copy and pasting. And the floating point dither is probably going to be fine the way it is. And we'll go from here. And we'll include that. And then we're replacing, which we don't normally do, but my new template includes the new form of this. This I produced earlier, so it has the old form of this. It says 118E minus 37 in both places. And that's not enough denormalization, and it doesn't produce a noise floor that is correct for the context. So we've just updated that. Now it says minus 23 and minus 17. And that's what we experimentally found created a little noise floor when we faded down to absolute and total silence and then boosted it way up again. And the nice thing about this denormalization noise as a noise floor is if we're making any sound, we actually have zero noise floor. If there's any real sound coming in, it's going to come in such a way that it's switching that off. The input sample is going to be larger than minus 23, and so the noise stuff will not even be happening. And that's useful because it means we don't have to repeatedly add the denormalization noise. If there's enough happening that we're not getting denormalization problems, then there won't be any extra noise added. But if we do need that to be happening, it will kick in, and it will sound like about 10 times better noise performance than any existing analog console, and that seems about right to me. So at this point, we probably have a working plugin. It's just not exactly what we wanted. Let's test that assumption. I think we're done with low pass. So we can build, and the build worked. We can go there and replace that. Let's open up another little sound clip. I'll bounce around through a bunch of my different music for fooling around with this stuff as just a kind of reminder that I've done multiple things, and just because I've been stuck on the one track in Logic for the last year doesn't mean that that's the only thing that I can do. Honestly, what I need to do is, once I finish this mixing session, I'm going to be doing more live streaming as far as going into Bespoke and creating stuff there. Because I feel like that is more likely for me to be able to do interesting and worthwhile things that are far enough away from that 70s jam band thing that people will react to them as if they are modern or worthwhile or new or anything like that. But it'll still have the same voicing that I was going after with the 70s jam band stuff. Like, just because I can hit play and then overdub a bunch of different instruments and play pretty much all the way through and not arrange anything doesn't mean that I can't get the same sound on a more tightly constructed or arbitrarily constructed. Like, I can do weird stuff too. Everybody knows that. But with Bespoke, I should be able to do weird stuff in a way that has more interesting arrangement. And I've been putting a bunch of time into learning how that can be done. clip only should affect intersample peaks without actually being designed to stop them specifically. It doesn't do anything like undersampling or oversampling. What it's doing is catching anything that clipped, and then if there is something that has clipped, it's going to slow the entry into the clip. So if you had a single sample spike that was just out of nowhere, and that would lead to an enormous intersample peak, clip only is going to drastically cut down the level of that specific peak just by the way that it operates. So it's not actually measuring or even knowing where the intersample peaks are happening, but the nature of its operation is such that it will stomp on those with great ferocity. And that's why it doesn't sound as bright and edgy as regular clipping, even though it's literally clipping everything that is clipped. Like, none of the non-clipped samples are changed in any way, only the clipped samples are changed, and then only the entry and exit samples of those get changed. Let's listen to some sounds. Oh, we're in all dry. That's why we're not hearing anything. Yep, that's the filter. It's a smooth filter with a bunch of gain on it. I can turn the gain down to 0.1 if I want for less distortion, but this is established that we do indeed have a low pass filter at this time. And there's my little guitar solo in there. It's funny how that stuff kind of works. As soon as you start doing something that's distinct and complicated enough, it's going to polarize people. I've often said it's just hard to live with that you can and should polarize people. Like, nothing should be a thing that's like, oh, everybody finds this inoffensive and nice. No, the people who love it should absolutely love it. The people who hate it should be freaked out and hate it and think it's the worst thing ever. Then you have to live with that. Then you have to live with the fact you're going to be hearing from the people that you hate, that hated the thing that you did. That's the challenge of doing stuff that is intentionally a polarizing experience, is that you got to deal with the fact that you're going to make somebody mad because you're legitimately upsetting them. You're doing something that they're very unhappy with. They're like, you should stop. And if you're doing the thing right, that's what's going to happen. Speaking of doing the thing right, our next job is to take this and translate it from the low-pass filter into the bandpass filter. So let's have a look at what that's going to mean. I've got our biquad frequency setting, and these are the things setting up the smooth behavior. I need to get back into Compress Saturator at some point. Compress Saturator could do with an update. I just don't have I made an effort at doing that, and it didn't actually go well. So I'm going to have to relook into that. That could be a more strenuous stream, I guess. Yeah, and dBESS is one of the things that people were getting mad at me about. Because a guy was like, it doesn't work at high sample rates. And honestly, there's a bunch of different kinds of mics that dBESS doesn't work on. It only works on stuff that's like literally a condenser mic that actually needs severe de-essing. It's not about singling out a frequency range like one might do with, oh God, what's that old plugin? It's a popular plugin with people. I forget the name of it now. There was a popular de-esser plugin back in the day where you could dial in the frequency and that was your S frequency and then it would duck. And DS and then dBESS after it are not like that. They're a very different design and require activity at the limit of your frequency response. So it's easiest to get a strong effect at 44.1K. It does scale to higher sample rates, but that still requires that the higher sample rates support activity going on way up there. Yeah, Fotis, you're exactly right. I was working a Compress Saturator too, and to put it aside, I wonder whether it's even still showing down here. Let's see. Option click. No, I don't actually see it. But I could make another one if I needed. Abandoned is a strong word. It's more along the lines of I wasn't able to get the thing that I was trying to do to work. It was unexpectedly just straight up failing to do that thing. I don't remember exactly what the thing was at the time, but if I look again at it, I'd probably get a better idea. And so I considered it to be something that wasn't working and put it aside, and I'll have to revisit it at some future time. That's basically how that works. And how this works is, here's our frequency setting. And here is the area that sets up the coefficients for the biquad filter, but in this case it is setting up the coefficients for what, and we can lose these because this is already taken care of. This is just setting up coefficients directly. This is setting up smooth coefficients. But they need to be basically the same format here. So, I don't know if dBest could be used to declick voice. I don't like the sound of Isotope having a monopoly on declick for voiceover. But that says maybe. There would be a similarity in, and I'm surprised. I thought Unfo was another developer, so maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. The idea of using the like DS/acceleration algorithm and smoothing it way out to the point, because basically what you're doing, if you were doing this kind of thing and you needed to do declick, what you would be doing is watching the waveform and tracking its trajectory, like where it's going, and you're allowing curves and things. You might be even more sophisticated and you would allow shifting of curves in a more organic way, but you're looking for sharp departures. You're looking for, rather than this is this trajectory, or even this trajectory is continuing to steepen in this direction, what you're looking for is suddenly, oh, and suddenly we're over here, like very loudly. So you're not actually tracking frequency ranges. You're looking at the frequency, the samples as they go along as a curve and plotting what that's going to be, if possible, at that higher level of sophistication where you're able to go like, okay, if we're on a sine wave, right? You could make it be that the sine wave is not only doing a series of samples, but the series of samples are also changing by a certain amount. The curve is continuing to turn over, and you can set up the algorithm so you're like, let's maintain not only this trajectory, but this rate of trajectory changing, and then watch for that. And that is how you would be doing the declicking thing, is you do that, maybe you allow a fairly significant amount of departure, like you'd allow it to do different things rather than just really being confined to the one thing. And then the declick algorithm, what you would do is, if it suddenly departs, rather than give the real information from the sample stream, you keep reconstructing the waveform as it's currently going. Like you've got this waveform bending over, and you continue to follow the curve. You're synthesizing new information coming in, and hope that you're going to catch back up with the waveform once it stopped clicking. And that's what makes it interesting. It's doable. It's something that we could look into in a future, like if I have a really, like I'm on top of my game and feeling very positive and doing a coding stream and probably drinking a lot of coffee, we can figure out how to do that, and we might actually get a working open source and free declicking plugin out of it. So then you would not be able to say there was a monopoly on declick. Just, shoot out the Airwindows declick against the isotope declick and pick which one you like, or pick which one's interface pleases you best. For now, let's finish up doing this bandpass. But like I told you, this is a good day to talk about this stuff because, doing the YBandpass shouldn't be that difficult. I might actually be pretty close to having it sorted out now. And we will just see. And what we're doing is starting with this, and it'll be essentially the same thing. Since this is an enum, it's the same as having this be this. Like, see, these wind up being essentially the same thing. But what we're going to be doing is making these match, right? So let's check and see that everything is correct. Like we've got mpi times, let's uncomment this as well. We're going to be deleting this soon enough. No worries. I'm in no position to scold anybody for commenting wrong today. This is one of those days when people scolded me for being crappy and making bad music that people hate, and so I'm not really sure there's anything that you can say in chat that's worse than that, so hey. And mostly what we're here for is identifying stuff like this. Oh hey, that's already taken care of, so we don't need that. And norm 1 divided by 1 plus k divided by that also is taken care of. And we're watching for which things actually are different. And hey, this seems to be one of those things. We'll see whether this is correct. And I believe that goes there. If I get this wrong, I'll have to go and fix it up later. And there, this looks about correct, except for this needs to be negative. And then that's the same. And then that's the same. So in theory, we just did it. Let's find out. Either that now gives me a bandpass, and I could simplify the code by taking out this multiplication. See, it says leave out this multiply, so I can make it a tiny, tiny bit more efficient by just leaving that stuff out, and indeed leaving the interpolation out. We'll see. That's something that maybe in the last half hour of my stream I can look into whether I can do that. Maybe leave little comments in saying that I had done it. comment out stuff and explain it that way. And we've still got a biquad A in there. Clearly I have copied and pasted something where I shouldn't have. And that's going to be right there. So that should fix that. Yeah, sometimes I feel terrible about being so inarticulate while doing this stuff. I really don't know what to do about that, because the thing is, oh, well, I know what to do about that. Let's test this while I'm at it. But there's also a message there, which is like, if people want to be able to produce a new plugin every week for years on end and have that kind of creativity going, it might be required to do stuff like that in the way that I'm doing them. That's definitely a bandpass. So this is probably the final plugin that you will get. I'll do a VST version of it during this week where I've got a lot of interesting stuff. I have my power steering on my car is getting fixed this week, and that's going to be good because you don't want your steering on your car to like randomly fail driving down the highway. If it did, what would happen is it would just get much heavier, but that can be dangerous in its own right. So I'm liking the smoothness of the adjustment. No zipper noise here. Let's hear what we get with Res Edge. Let's distort it a little bit, or a lot. Oh, this might work. Edge and less resonance. So this is what makes... Oh, I can do Y notch next week. But this might have uses for like weird D&B stuff or whatever is getting strange. Take any synthesizer sound or whatever. And we can get this gritty filter effect going. And then we can use Res Edge to affect that grit tone. To where it's completely clean. Or has that slight edgy hair on it. So yeah, digital distorted filter. Looks like we got it going on. This, you can have this next Sunday unless people desperately want one of the backlog plugins, like the Pressure or whatever. But in context like this, I see it as being useful to have the high degree of distortion and to be able to bring in that edge. And make it brighter and gatier. To fully bright and gaty. Yeah, a usable effect, and something like Bespoke in particular, you can just generate an effect out of this, which has a sort of weird analog fuzz box quality to it. Almost like your Fuzz Factory or something. Yeah, I think this is going to work. I think you might very well want to have a copy of this next Sunday. It feels to me like the kind of sound that you get out of overdriving and overloading analog gear, and that's the idea. Get more edgy. Or cleaner. And interestingly enough, I hear the distinction here. At 0.1, this is essentially normal. Like it may be distorted, but it's acting like a normal smooth biquad. Either direction makes it become one of the special YBandpass things. So in the positive direction, we have the nasty edge. But in the negative direction, we have something else. We have a sort of warming, softening effect going on. Which is giving us a certain tone that I think will also turn out useful. I was observing this earlier. When I demonstrated Y low pass, I was using this technique to make it sound more like my Alpha Junos. And in fact, we can use the amount of gain on tap, since normally, like a bandpass like this. Oh, hello. Didn't mean to do that. Undo. Normally, a bandpass like this, set to no boost. This is just very quiet compared to full dry wet. Like it's dropping off quite a bit. And one of the things that I did in the Z-plane filters, which all of this work is towards being able to revisit the Z-plane filters and make them smoothed and better. That's coming too. But because your bandpass tends to suck energy out of things, you can use the gain and slam it and distort it. To get a useful sort of bandpassy sound out of there, because now it has a distortion in it. We'll dial it back a little bit, give it more output. Maybe not all that much output. Then we can soften the resonance so that it's broader. Or tighten it right up. And again, that is limiting the amount of gain everywhere else that's not the resonant part. So we increase gain again so that we can hear it more clearly. And this is probably quite a useful filter run stuff, because we've got the saturation in there, we've got the nonlinearity of res edge, but it's being used at a less than 0.1, so it's sort of a tone color rather than the nasty edge that res edge normally gives you. Let's split the difference there. Like 0.1 is normal, so 0.05 there we go, we've got a slightly distinct tone color to it. I can live with this. That's got the kind of tone that I'd like to get out of a filter. Alrighty. I think we got there. So what else do we have to do? I was thinking about maybe increasing the efficiency of it a little bit by doing stuff like this. AB1. We actually don't need to do anything with AB1. Nor do we need to do anything with AA1. We're just going to leave those unassigned. They're all going to be 0 because here there is 0. Meaning that we also are going to comment this out because we don't need to do AB1 or AA1 because this is always going to be 0, so we're never going to actually use this. But the other stuff we are. And so we're looking for the biquad term that is A1. This is the one that's going to always be 0, so we can alter the actual code of the biquad and take that part out, knowing that it will never amount to anything anyhow. Let's go in search of it. And these don't count because these are a different kind of biquad. But in here, this is the one where we are going to have a thing. Like A1. Where do we find this? We find it right here. This is always going to be 0. So this entire thing is always going to be 0. Input sample times always going to be 0 is going to amount to nothing. So we cannot do that multiply. And that means it's 0 minus this or negative this. And we've now simplified our bandpass a little bit, which is handy because there's uses for bandpasses. Like we can do a bandpass in a bunch of different things, and being able to do it in this way, you know, every little bit helps. It might be only one less divide, but or multiply by 0, but if that is one less multiply, and multiplies can be expensive in computers. 96,000 times a second, then well, that adds up. So it's worth doing. And now that we've done that, let's see if it still works. And if it still works, we might just call it a day and say that this was a successfully navigated coding stream. And I will tell you to look forward for, did I put that in the right place? I hope so. Let's be sure. This is one of those days when I'm a little discombobulated, and so I'm just going to make sure that I did that right. Bandpass component, come to think of it, let's also option drag it to the desktop because this is what I'm building for Sunday. Goes in components, older version. Now let's see if that still works. Because if I'm correct, it still works. And I could see this having plenty of uses, honestly. Some people who do things like run special kick drum mics for one of those Yamaha sub kicks or whatever, or just doing things where they're like repeatedly using lots of frequency isolating stuff. Like they know that they want this drum to be sitting in a particular frequency range and they're not really interested in having it anywhere else. Like the opposite of the sooth thing. This would be useful for that because what you can do is have your thing going on. And you can isolate it as much as you want, or you can have it be fairly broad. And you can have it be a nice, clean, not very distorted, or you can overdrive just that and it'll be contained within the bandpass, so you're not getting a lot of gritty clipping outside the bandpass. It acts almost like a compressor. And you can get your tonal shift with res edge here. And that's fairly easy to hear on this low frequency bandpass. Like if I switch this to 0.1, that is vanilla. And this is the shift in tone from doing lower res edge. And of course, we can clip. If we dial in this clippiness just right, we can get a bit of additional spikiness on the output that still kind of sits within the frequency of the bandpass, but not really. So in theory, if I get this really close to 0.1, I can dial in the area where that slight volume spike starts to show up. And then we have just a little bit of edge that is accentuating the dynamics of the underlying track. There's just this little buzz on top of things, which is an artifact, it's extra. Because at 0.1 we don't have that, but we can sneak a tiny amount of it in. And when we do that, we feel the drums a little bit more clearly, because it's accentuating dynamics. got that slight lift in gain because we've got distortion, but the distortion sort of pokes through to a louder volume level because of res edge, like this. But we can suppress that so that it's darker, so it's just an artifact. Because one of the tricks about stuff like this is that if you're making an artifact like that, well, you've already got artifacts in your distortion, and so you combine the two artifacts. You have the distracting quality of the distortion artifacts that already are there, and then you also allow through this like dynamic poking through and have that be about as loud as the sound of the distortion clipping is. And you wind up with a distorted effect, such as we're hearing, where the drums and percussive aspects are getting a little extra boost because the loudest parts of the waveform are poking through the distortion into another zone where they're creating another kind of artifact that is related to the sound that's happening. And that's how you'd be able to get an unusual sort of distorty overtone onto this. So you might be able to do stuff like treat it as a sound enhancing device. Like we'll give that slight peak in there. We're doing a low frequency boost here. And we can kind of hear it going along like this. Well, our raw sounds like this. And then if we want to add that sort of amp-like boost, we can include a small amount of the wet into it. So now we have a little bandpass, a little distortion, and a little res edge artifact. And that makes a complicated, interesting sound that's usable in this context. Compare like what the bass sounds like here to dry, which is more the correct sound. But let's suppose that we were trying to just bring out the bass ampy quality of this bass guitar, and we've got this, and for whatever reason we just wanted the bass to sound more like it was a bass amp and be much louder. We'd kick on this. And those slight artifacts, it's not purely distortion, it's got some of that extra crackliness in there. But then when we suppress it, we're blending it in with dry, and we have a little more dynamicness inside the distortion. This would also work for drums. This would work for things like snares and stuff. In fact, let's literally try that before I shut down for the day and go do something else. Maybe fool with those surge synthesizer presets I was talking about. And the noise that I'm hearing is actually my laptop straining, because it is fairly hard for this antique laptop. Remember that I'm demoing all of this on a really antique laptop. Like, we are using 2.53 gigahertz Intel Core i5 with 8 gigs of RAM. This is an older machine. My hope is that it'll also run great on modern machines that can eat this stuff up like crazy. But let's see what we can get out of this. So if we were taking this, what might we want to boost? Well, let's say that we want more distorted edge on the lows, but we also want dynamics in there. Let's go to the full bandpass effect. Let's say we want around that amount of resonant boost. And we also want the extra dynamics rather than just only a fattened, thickened, overdriven sound. So we're going to put more res edge until it pops a little bit. And we're going to need to turn up gain to get it to do that. In fact, let's turn up gain all the way. That'll do it. So there's our edge. Let's say that's the range that we want. It can be very tightly focused, or it can be a little widened out. And this is where it kind of sits. Like, let's say that that's the area that we want to bring in. But if we are only using just pure distortion, that's going to be thickening stuff up without adding punch. It's kind of adding punch, but it's kind of not. So res edge comes to the help. And we can get this sort of spike. And then if we blend small amounts of that in, it feels like we have additional energy, but without just making it real sustaining. And let's dial that in a little bit more. That feels like a place where we can plainly hear the clicking of res edge kicking in. And we're going to try to dial that in such a way where it's giving dynamic punch that we can blend in with dry wet. Anteater, no, never do that. Anytime I put music out, it's just what it is. And half the time I don't take it very seriously anywho, so... because I've done that when I was working with older synthesizers and things, and it's a recipe for just never doing anything new, and that's always a challenge for me anyhow, so we're not going to go there. Now let's see, as far as this particular drum sound, that's too much crickliness on the sounds, so we're going to dial res edge back. That's just purely distortion, and we're going to go somewhere between that and this, so that we have a little of that gatiness, we have a little of that extra punch, but it's not up in the super high frequencies like this. So let's go and find that, and then we're going to do dry wet and blend them. This again is pretty much purely just saturation. That's too much crackle, and so the medium ground is going to be like here. I'm going to take it to just where I begin to hear artifacts happening. which one neat thing about that is it sounds like air distorting a little bit too. And having done this, let's now do our dry wet. Here's our raw sound, which doesn't sound anywhere near as heavy and overdriven. Here's our purely overdriven sound with its slight crunchiness. And here's our blend. Raw. And we can probably push res edge a little harder because we're doing the dry wet thing, so we're concealing the artifacts. So now let's switch back to my regular camera since we've finished our work there. Turn it right up. And a little bypass action. So we're taking this drum recording and using YBandpass to distort and add artifacts to the mid-range. It turns to this. Dry, wet. So that's the kind of thing that could definitely mix into something and give a little more oomph. We've just got more punch going on here compared to this, which is more generic and ordinary. And if we don't like where the frequencies are sitting, or if we want to do something weird at some point in the song, we can do this. And that's all using YBandpass and the ability of the res edge control to add weird artifacts that poke out in a spiky way but then integrate them into the sound. We have a distort equality from just maxed out fully cranked gain, but in such a way that it's adding dynamic punch in a broader way than we would from just cranking the gain and having it be straight up distorted. There's that spike on there. And as we blend it in, we can pretty much plainly hear what it's doing. We get to have a real distorted quality, but it's also very dynamic and aggressive. And that's because res edge is producing loud artifacts that we're then burying in dry wet. I think that's a very usable effect. It's almost worth going and continuing to do the same damn song people are complaining about, because this is from that song, and just demonstrating this out of it. And of course, the thing we're adding to dry here is this. It's loud bursts of distortion on top of the regular saturation. Like if we didn't have that, the sound of just distortion, like listen to what that's doing. If we were only a distorted filter rather than this weird artifact behavior, it'd be this. Very different, very different. So there you have it. And we're going to call that a day, I think. And yeah, as far as people working on finding plugin chains and stuff, honestly, I do the same thing. You know, whether or not people like what I do with it, I do the same thing. And it's one of the things I like doing. Right now, my control surface here, that you can't see, but it's down here, has galactic chamber, my new pressure, and monitoring too. So it's a bunch of stuff you can't have yet, but you'll be having it pretty soon. And it's the revised versions of galactic and chamber, which you can have, and the revised version of pressure, which will be coming out, which has the drive on the end. So I've got knobs for replace, dry wet, longness, dry wet, and that's galactic and chamber. And then pressure, speed, drive, and monitor, because I have a knob just for the controls in monitoring so that I can rapidly switch it to different things just by turning a dial and hear what things are doing through a bunch of different auditory windows. And let's see now. So I will bid you adieu for today, because I feel like this has worked out. Turns out that YBandpass is darn useful. I could see that being very handy for a bunch of things, because the ability to have that distorted quality in any particular frequency range, the gain adding is perfect for that. And then on top of that, using ResEdge in this particular context is better than I would have hoped, because it lets you have this extreme transient punch that you can dial in and then place it anywhere you want, and then use it to fill in the sort of grunge and tonality of any particular dry sound that you've got. And then you kind of dial in not only the distorted quality in whatever frequency range you want to accentuate, not dissimilar to what, hang on, let me look at this. Focus, which is the key plugin for sweetening dull, flat, or scooped mics. You'll be able to do that with this as well. Except for it will also let you dial in ResEdge for a kind of transient spikiness and punchiness. And that is, yeah, I won't have to wait terribly long. I can give it to you this coming Sunday. So, all in all, I think that worked out pretty good. And I will say goodbye to chat. And I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for bearing with me on this somewhat challenging day. I feel like on the one hand, that was a good plugin release, because clip-only 2, even if there are people who are like, it doesn't act the same way as it doesn't work for high sample rates when that was the whole point, they might feel that way, but I know that it is doing its thing and that is the intent. So people have different reactions. There are people who will measure that kind of stuff on metering plugins and so on, and then if the measurements don't exactly match at the lower and higher sample rates, or if it acts slightly different, they'll be like, it's broken, doesn't work. And it's not necessarily always that simple. All this stuff is working on algorithms that are going to react differently at different rates, and I need to optimize for whatever rate it is that you're at. Anywho, that's just maybe. I will, like, I don't know, get a little rest or something, and I'll catch up with you later. I may or may not be doing anything because, again, I have 2 mixing sessions this week. So the next time you see me might very well be Sunday. But if you see me on Sunday, it'll be with YBandpass. And maybe using that literal same track that I was getting the flack over, because that's where this drum sound comes from. And I can demonstrate YBandpass on this drum sound. Go figure. We'll see. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.